Ladies and gentlemen, I have great pleasure in introducing to you today Dr. Verrier Elwin, who is going to deliver a series of lectures on the philosophy of love. I need not, generally speaking, introduce Dr. Elwin to any audience of scholars and educationists. He is well known, but he is more especially known in the field of anthropology and anthropological research. He has taken keen interest in the study of the life and habits of the tribes inhabiting various parts of our country. And the results of his study are too well known for me to describe them here. He has published some of his books, which are quite popular and known. And in this series of Patel lectures, we felt that his would be a first-class contribution in an original line of research. This was all the more important from our point of view, because India is one of those countries where tribes in various stages of development stay in large numbers. These tribes might be numerically sometimes not very big, sometimes they might be quite big, but the variety and the various stages of development that we find here are probably unmatched in any other country. This is a fruitful field for a student of anthropology and human development. And that is probably one of the loves of Dr. Elwin, to which he has devoted all his life. We are very grateful to him that he has agreed this year to deliver this series of lectures on a particular aspect of tribal life. I would like to say a few words regarding the Patel Memorial Lectures. As you know, these series were introduced in memory of the late Sardar Patel, who was the first minister of broadcasting in India and therefore was instrumental in founding broadcasting in free India. These lectures are meant to give to the listeners the benefit of valuable research or original thinking by well-known scholars, thinkers, or philosophers. These lectures are afterwards printed for the benefit of those who were not able to listen or who later on, after listening, would like to keep these lectures, which are the result of long years of research. We have had already quite a distinguished series of lecturers. The first lecture, as you know, was given by Sri C. Rajagopalacharya. Later, Dr. Krishnan, Professor Halden, Dr. Zakir Hussain, and Dr. Tarachand have delivered lectures on various subjects of which they are specialists. We will have today another brilliant specialist who will deliver to us, I'm quite sure, as interesting a series of lectures. Dr. Elwin.
Dr. Keska, ladies and gentlemen, it is not only a very great honor to have been chosen to give these lectures in memory of Sardar Patel, one of the chief leaders and unifiers of India before and after independence. But there's a special personal privilege for me in this, since it was through Sardar Vallabhbhai that my own great love, which has dominated me now for 3 decades, was first awakened. In 1930, Sardar asked me to go to Gujarat to make an inquiry into what was happening to the satyagrahis, the non-violent warriors of Gandhiji there. and I can still vividly remember the welcome he gave me on the steps of his house in Bardoli, and how it was during my tours through the villages of Gujarat that I had my first contact with the tribal people, the very poor and exploited Dublas. Later in Sabarmati, when the problem of my own future was urgent, Sardar Patel suggested that I should work for the tribal people in central India. I may claim, therefore, that Sardar had a profound influence on the course of my own life, and the subject that I have taken, a philosophy of love, is in every way appropriate to his own interest in the poor of this country and in the tribal people. In fact, he made a strong speech urging their development in the Constituent Assembly when it was preparing the Constitution. Now, I've taken as my subject a philosophy of love. It's a difficult subject, for the word love, as has often been pointed out, is so wide that it is difficult to give it any exact definition. There's the love of husband and wife, the love between parents and children, or of friend and friend. There's the impassioned love between lovers. The religious speak of loving God, the patriotic of loving their country. We may love books, or love playing tennis, love going to the cinema. Some of us love good food. Dr. Johnson thought love was unimportant and said that love is only one of many passions and has no great influence on the sum of life. Edith Gill, on the other hand, thought love was so fundamental that a work of art was the work of a lover's worship. Love is sometimes regarded as a disease, a threat to virtue and happiness. At the same time, it is held to be a sweet and ennobling longing of the soul. It is delight and it is torment. There is the courtly love of the troubadours, which idealized romantic passion, the cynicism of Ovid, which regarded love as a ridiculous and comic appetite, the pure and exalted love of Buddha or Ramakrishna. Love is not so hackneyed, in spite of all that, as a subject as it may appear. We all know about it, of course, and every one of us knows at least that love is a many-splendid thing and makes the world go round. But although there's been a great deal of literature about love affairs, love as such hasn't in recent years been much considered. There's an enormous literature on sex, but the comparative neglect of love is a weakness in Freud as it is in the Kinsey reports. Nor have thinkers and writers been unanimous in their praise of love, and it's extraordinary to reflect today that Nietzsche glorified war, the very negation of love, as having done greater things in the world than the love of man. And even Ruskin declared war to be the mother of art and civic virtue. In these lectures I shall speak mainly of the love which goes out to human beings and upward to the ideal, or what we call the divine. I shall not have very much to say about erotic love, except to try to fit it into our philosophy, so that it does not appear as the enemy of what we call the higher love, but as part of it. And if I have nothing very new to say, let me remind you of the words of Max Muller, which were once quoted by Gandhiji. The truth needs to be repeated as long as there are men who disbelieve it. Now, the importance of love to the thinkers of antiquity is illustrated by the fact that nearly all of them have supposed it to be one of the great values, one of the creative energies operating throughout the universe. The poets and mystics have often thought of love as the cosmic power that counteracts the disintegrating forces of chaos, unites what is separated by enmity, builds what is destroyed by discord, creates and maintains the grand order in the whole universe. In ancient Greece, for example, Empedocles, who originated the doctrine of the four elements, held that they were kept in continual motion and change, as they were alternately combined by love and separated by strife. The first unified, the second divided. At one time, all unite in one through love. At another, each is borne in different directions by the repulsion of strife. This process continues endlessly, and whenever strife separates the elements of which the world is composed, love enters in to combine them again. This love does not only act in the cosmic sphere, but as Empedocles says, makes mortals have thoughts of love and work the works of peace. A similar idea is expressed with poetic grace by the Latin poet Boethius of the 5th century, who is concerned to emphasize the order and harmony of the universe. This is what he says, that the universe with unchanging fidelity varies its harmonious seasons, that seeds of things discordant mutually keep an abiding covenant, that the greedy sea compels its waves to keep fixed limits. The binder of all this order of things, who rules the earth and sea, and holds sway in the very heavens, is love. Should he let go the reins, all things that now live in mutual affection would be at continual strife, and would seek to break up the great machine, of which with all its lovely motions they are actually the driving forces. He it is who imposes on peoples the holy treaty of peace, who welds with chaste love the sacred bond of marriage, who promulgates his law to faithful comrades. O happy race of men, if love by whom the heavens are ruled should also rule your souls. And in another passage, Boethius again raises the thoughts of men from this world distracted by hatred and division. If you would discover, he says, with mind comprehensive and serene, the constitutions of the thunderer on high, examine the vast altitudes of heaven. There, bound by a treaty of justice innate in things, the stars maintain their original peace. And through eternal love, eternal courses are renewed, and discordant war is absent from the regions inhabited by the stars. It was, however, Aristotle who, building on the Platonic idea of eros, chiefly developed the cosmic notion of love. Plato had taught that eros was a movement of the human soul towards whatever is beautiful and desirable. Aristotle widened this idea to include a movement from matter to the ideal form, from imperfection to perfection, from potentiality to actuality. And what sets the whole process in motion is the pure form, which, though it's itself unmoved, is the source of all motion. It sets things going as a loved object sets in motion him who loves it by its attraction and the desire it inspires. And this desire is eros, which in the hands of Aristotle becomes a driving force of the universe, whereby the lower is all the time striving towards the higher. This conception lies behind the great words of the Divine Comedy, when it speaks of the love that moves the sun and the other stars. George Fox had a vision of an ocean of darkness and death, but an infinite ocean of light and love flowed over the ocean of darkness. The poets are never tired, in fact, of extolling the beauty and the power of love, but I must be content with only one more reference, to Kabir, who often thought of love in terms of music. The universe is the play of the divine lover. Brahma is manifested in movement, rhythm, delight. The world dances. The melody of love swells forth. The swing of the ocean of joy is held by the chords of love. The unstruck music is sounded. It is the music of the love of the three worlds. The lover swings in play, love songs resound, Music is all around the lotus that blooms at the heart of the spinning wheel of the universe. The man who hears it tastes the entrancement of the heavenly nectar. This is all from Tagore's translation of Kabir's poems. It goes on to say, the true Guru fills the cup of true love, drinks of it himself and offers it to his worshipper, filling all utterance with love. He opens the eyes of love, which can then see the sorrowless land. The vision of the beloved gives the ecstasy of love and joy in the heart. Now all this, you may say, is poetry, an optimistic mysticism that is pretty to listen to, but which has no basis in reality. But there is, I think, something more than mere poetry here. The working of the universe actually does reveal harmony and integration. We're all, you know, the creatures of the cliches among which we have grown up. From the middle of the last century, such phrases as the struggle for existence or the survival of the fittest, and for a long time the biologist's theory that the animal world was like a gladiator's show. These cliches have conditioned our thinking, and more recently the general Freudian climate of our lives, supporting the old idea of original sin, has destroyed our belief even in our babies, who appear as little gangsters possessed by jealousy and hate. The result has been that I think many people have felt that it is all hopeless. But the natural thing is for everything and everybody to fight for itself. That struggle is the law of existence, and thus hatred and war are inevitable. But during the present century there has been more and more evidence to suggest that cooperation may be even more important in the evolutionary process than competition. Biology isn't my subject, but I understand that many biologists now find that there is a sort of unconscious mutualism which produces survival values for every form of life. And as far back as 1871, Darwin declared in The Descent of Man that as man advances in civilization and small tribes are united into larger communities, the simplest reason would tell each individual that he ought to extend his social instinct and sympathies to all members of the same nation, though personally unknown to him. This point being once reached, there is only an artificial barrier to prevent his sympathies extending to the men of all nations and races. In modern times, in fact, it is widely recognized that while in nature there is indeed a struggle for life, there is also such a thing as a struggle for the life of others. And today the principle of cooperation is in a fair way to becoming established as the most important factor in the survival of animal groups as of individuals. From the protozoa right up to man, this mutual aid has been established. There is a social appetite even in the lowest organisms. And no longer can big business, colonialism, the domination of weaker by stronger nations be supported by the supposed example of the natural world. Now, above love, pictured as active in the cosmos, rises the idea of love as God. This definition descends through history from Plato and the earliest philosophers down to Mahatma Gandhi, and at different times has meant very different things. For example, God as love may mean little more than the love which the idea of supreme perfection excites in the thinker or artist. To Gandhiji, God as love was the same as God as truth, for love or ahimsa and truth were identical. Then there are the love gods, Cupid, Eros, Amor, Karma, with their arrows and diverting ways, who inspire love in men. Others have thought of God as a being with whom it is possible to have personal relations, and they've fallen in love with him and believe that God loves them in return. It's said on one side that it is impossible to love God unless we love our fellow men, and on the other, that it is impossible to love our fellow men unless we love God. I'm not sure that the second part of this is altogether true. Yet whatever our idea of God, which after all may range from some notion of an ultimate abstraction, a universal mind, an ideal of perfection, to a divine person, there is no doubt that the idea of love as God has been a great inspiration to mankind for thousands of years, and even those of us who have no very clear idea of God or believe in him can find something in it. No one has written better on God as love than the philosopher-theologian St. Augustine. His teaching on the subject is a synthesis of the Eros of Plato and the Christian agape, which I'll discuss in detail immediately. God, who is defined as love, gives love to mankind, yet at the same time man strives upward and outward through love towards the divine vision and his fellow men. A profound scholar, Kenneth Kirk, who taught me at Oxford 35 years ago, used to analyze Augustine's teaching on love under three heads. The first was that love always confers independence on the object of its love. It imposes nothing. It demands no return. It goes on giving even if it cannot excite love in answer. It is the one force in the world which does not bargain, which leaves the recipient completely free to reject, accept, or repay. Secondly, while love endows the recipient with freedom, it also confers freedom on the giver. Love and freedom are thought of as existing together from all eternity in the nature of God. But this is also true of man. In love and in love alone can he actualize the freedom, the formal right to be free, which God has given him. Passion enslaves its votary. Love enfranchises him from passions. Passion blinds him to the defects of its object, till in the end it is repelled and killed by them. Love opens his eyes to them, but gives at the same time an undying desire for their removal. Passion leads to madness, love to sympathetic understanding. Passion destroys personality, love creates it. Man becomes free as he learns to love. And then thirdly, Kirk used to say, love is irresistible. Many waters cannot quench it. It is undaunted by opposition, rejection, irresponsiveness. It lives by giving out, not by taking in. Love never faileth. Nothing is so hard that love cannot soften it. And therefore, whatever opposes it must in the end give way. Then Spinoza, to change key a little, whom Bertrand Russell has called the noblest and most lovable of the great philosophers, speaks of the intellectual love of God. It is significant that he entitles the last two books of his Ethics of human bondage or the strength of the emotions, and of the power of the understanding or human freedom. He removes love from the sphere of the appetites and finds it based in the emotions, which of course bring man into bondage and until he's able to understand and control them by the intelligence. He who clearly and distinctly understands himself and his emotions loves God, this Spinoza. And this is the intellectual love of the mind towards God, which is part of the infinite love wherewith God loves himself. Love towards God must hold the chief place in the mind, but he who loves God cannot endeavor that God should love him in return. God, according to Spinoza, is beyond passions or pleasure or pain, and since love involves these, though he may love himself, he cannot love man. And yet love is associated with happiness. Love is joy. Pleasurable excitement, therefore, with the accompanying idea of an external cause, is love. So too Swami Vivekananda declares that every act of love brings happiness. There is no act of love which does not bring peace and blessedness as its reaction. Now, the Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset has criticized Spinoza's view on the ground that, although no one can doubt that the lover can find happiness in his beloved, it is no less certain that love is sometimes sad as death, a supreme and mortal torment. And he points out that Spinoza did not observe carefully. Loving is not happiness, he thinks. He who loves his country may die for it, and the martyr may perish out of love. And conversely, there is a kind of hatred that derives pleasure from itself, that is transported with joy by the harm that befalls the hated person. Spinoza saw clearly that the desire for revenge narrows a man and spoils his happiness, but he believed that hatred and revenge could be overcome by love. Hatred is increased by being reciprocated and can, on the other hand, be destroyed by love. Hatred, which is completely vanquished by love, passes into love, and love is thereupon greater than if hatred had not preceded it. And he goes on to say that minds are not conquered by arms, but by love and generosity. The idea of God as love has given rise all over the world to extraordinary demonstrations of affection for ideal persons who, though deified, are thought of in human terms. The psychologists haven't been slow to trace these manifestations to the frustrated lives of ascetics, declaring that the mystics or devotees give to their divine lovers what they have been unable to find on earth. Be that as it may, the phenomenon is one that we cannot ignore in any discussion of love, and I'll give a few examples. Let us consider first the bhaktas of India, some of them saints and heroes. The philosophers of the bhakti movement, whether in Western India or in Bengal, whether Mira or Tukaram, made several attempts at an analysis of that param prem, the perfect love on which their heart was set. One of these borrows its terminology from Indian poetics and arranges an ascending scale of the rasa, or flavors of bhakti, each of which is produced by an abstract dominant emotion and finds a corresponding outward expression. Rasa, we are told by Vishwanatha, the 15th century writer of aesthetics, in his Sahitya Darpan, is the very essence of all poetry. It is understood only by those who are akin to it, but those who are competent find in the tasting of rasa something not unlike spiritual experience. It is pure, indivisible, self-manifested, compounded equally of joy and consciousness, free of admixture with any other perception, the twin brother of mystical experience, and the very life of it is supersensuous wonder. All the great arts are brothers, and it is no wonder that the art of contemplative love should borrow its terms from the art of expression and find in the soul of poetry some likeness to the soul. The Greeks, who examined the idea of love with great attention and understanding, had three different words for it: eros, philia, and agape. We'll consider the use of the word agape later, since it was adopted by the early Christians to express the specifically Christian idea of love. I'll speak now a little about Eros, which was taken from the mystery religions of the ancient world and transformed by Plato. Later it passed into Neoplatonism and greatly influenced the outlook of the Christian mystics. The word today has deteriorated, and especially in its adjectival form erotic, is used to signify sexual love. Plato did in fact speak of the vulgar eros, by which he meant sensual desire, but he carefully distinguished it from the heavenly eros, which is a movement of the soul towards something which it considers perfect. The Greeks tested love by the amount of self-interest it contained. At the bottom came selfish, self-regarding love. Above it was a love which gave delight, and above that was a love which regarded another for his or her own sake. Plato's essential teaching is to show how to escape from the world of sense to which the vulgar eros, or normal sensual love, binds the soul, and use the heavenly eros as a ladder towards the real eternal world that lies beyond. One day, some 2,400 years ago, on the banks of the delightfully clear and bright Ilissus, with the air full of summer sights and sounds, and the Agnus casters high and clustering in the fullest blossom and the greatest fragrance, Socrates and Phaedrus sat under the waving branches of a plane tree, on grass like a pillow gently sloping to the head, and discussed the philosophy of love. It was the higher heavenly eros, of course, about which Socrates spoke with an inspired eloquence. He described how the philosopher, or true lover, has formerly seen beauty in heaven shining with the celestial forms, and on earth too he finds her shining in clearness through the clearest aperture of sense. As he is initiated into this vision, he forgets earthly interests and is wrapped in the divine, and when he sees the beauty of earth, is transported with the recollection of the true beauty. The myth of Eros in the Phaedrus describes how, as a stone by its nature is attracted downwards, so the soul by her divine nature is attracted upwards, for all things that exist strive to reach their natural place. This upward attraction of the soul is Eros, Eros love. Eros corresponds in the spiritual world to the attraction of gravity in the natural world. Eros forbids the soul to settle down, to rest in the material, and continually reminds her that here she is but a sojourner and a stranger. We may amplify this by Plato's own discussion in the Symposium. Listen to this is very fine. When anyone, he says, having the right kind of love, mounts up and begins to see the beauty present in the beautiful person, he is not far from the final goal. For the right way of love is to begin with the beautiful things that are seen here, and ascend ever upwards, aiming at the beauty that is above, climbing as it were on a ladder from one beautiful body to two, and from two to all the others, and from beautiful bodies to beautiful actions, and from beauty of actions to beautiful forms of knowledge, till at length from these one reaches that knowledge which is the knowledge of nothing other than beauty itself, and so knows at last what beauty really is. And when one has attained thither, there, if anywhere, is the life that is worth living, in the beholding of beauty itself. Now, Eros, the Platonic Eros, has been described as selfish and tainted with earthly desire. Yet Eros love is also a madness that is a divine gift, just as poetry is. And the madness of love is the greatest of heaven's blessings. For true love, as distinct from mere casual attraction, consists in seeing in the loved one the traces of the ultimate beauty, in behaving towards the beloved after the manner of God, and desiring that the object of one's affections should have a soul like Zeus. And far from being merely confined to a self-centered, selfish achievement of the spiritual vision, Plato traces here an intimate connection between the love of God and the well-being of our fellow men. Love is the sweetest of all pleasures, and is the reason why the soul of the lover will never forsake his beautiful one, whom he esteems above all, and for this he is willing to make very great sacrifices. This love begins with earthly human love, but the pure soul, once it has put off the folly of the body, shall see the entire truth and understand the universal love. An idea placed on the lips of Aristophanes in the Symposium, and it is possible that it is not intended, since it's placed on the lips of Aristophanes, to be very serious, has had a great deal of influence even today, especially on the minds of romantic young lovers. Aristophanes suggests that originally the sexes of mankind were not two as they are now, but three, man, woman, and the union of the two. And so terrible was the might of this union, and the thought of their hearts so great, that Zeus decided to humble their pride and improve their manners. He cut them in two, and after the division, the two parts of man, each desiring his other half, came together, and throwing their arms about one another, longed to grow into one. From this came the well-known idea that for every man there is a woman, and for every woman there is a man who is the perfect mate, and it is only when they find each other that a perfect marriage will be achieved. For as Plato says, such a nature is prone to love and ready to return love, always embracing that which is akin to him. And when one of them meets with his other half, the actual half of himself, the pair are lost in amazement of love and friendship and intimacy. These are the people who pass their whole lives together. Happy is the man who thus finds his better half. And then into the Greek philosophical world of eros love, there came the specifically Christian idea of agape love. Eros, as we've seen, starts from a love of the beautiful and is a movement upwards of the mind and spirit towards it. For Plato, love is always a movement towards, to possess and to create. On the other hand, agape is regarded as having its origin in God and moving downwards to all creation. Selfless and free from desire, the divine agape possesses a man and creates in him the love of his fellows. A great deal has been written on the contrast of agape and eros by de Rougemont, Pierre Rousselot, the Swedish theologian Anders Nygren, and the Oxford Jesuit Father M.C. Darcy, and they each have a rather different approach. Nygren, for example, is mainly concerned to contrast eros and agape, and actually declares that the history of the conflict between them is the history of Christian thought. He does not accept the Platonic eros as the forerunner of Christian doctrine. It is a rival, an enemy of what he regards as the higher concept. It's not a question of eros being a merely carnal type of love, you see, for it is love, as we've said, in its most refined and spiritual form, the desire of the soul of man to attain salvation by detachment from earthly objects of desire and by seeking after heavenly things. But coming, as Nygren says, originally from the loins of the dark Indo-European religions, it remains, for all the beauty with which Plato endowed it, comparatively egocentric, for even its search for the perfect was to find blessedness for itself. But agape is theocentric. In Nygren's view, eros is essentially human love, even though God is its object. Agape is essentially God's own love, for God is agape. Eros is given only to those who deserve it. Agape is poured out on the evil as well as on the good. Eros recognizes value in its object and therefore loves it. Agape creates value in its object by its love. Eros is a form of self-assertion, even though of the highest and noblest kind. Agape is entirely unselfish, seeking not its own and freely spending itself. Other writers have questioned these sharp distinctions, and in particular, Father Darcy considers that the two forms of love have to live together and there should be no ultimate conflict between them. On the one side, there is man with a passion which seeks for deliverance. On the other, God who respects man's integrity while lifting him up into a new relation of love with himself. Eros made its way into Christian mysticism through Neoplatonism and St. Thomas Aquinas, and St. Augustine combined Eros and Agape in some sort of harmony in the idea of caritas, charity, which dominated the religious thought of medieval Europe. Father Darcy seems to find a reconciliation between the two words in the third Greek word, philia, which we usually translate friendship, a relationship in which the persons do not love their own personalities at the expense of others, but give freely to one another. Now, to some extent, we find a rather similar distinction between the Indian calm and prema. Here too we have the difficulty that these words receive very different interpretations at different times. Calm is desire, and there can be a vulgar calm, which is concerned only with sexual passion and lust, where the desire of self-enjoyment is paramount. I'll give one interpretation of these two words by Bipin Chandra Pal. Lust in Bengali is kama and love is prema. The terms, however, came to be mixed up in popular imagination, wherein there was a distinct degeneration of both the words. They had therefore to be differentiated by the Chaitanya movement, which initiated a new bhakti cult. In the Chaitanya Charitamrit, therefore, we find calm or lust defined as desire for the satisfaction of one's own senses, while prema is defined as desire for the senses of Sri Krishna. Satisfaction of the senses is an element common to both lust and love. The difference between the two is in their conscious objectives. In lust, the desire for self-satisfaction or self-enjoyment dominates. In love, not self-enjoyment, but the enjoyment or pleasure of the object of love overwhelms and almost obliterates the desire for self-enjoyment. This is the culmination of all love romance. The consciousness of self is completely lost in the highest and purest love. The culmination of all true love, even in human experience, is not only the complete absence of the consciousness of self, but the realization of the universal in and through our particular passions. Other thinkers have given karma a higher dignity. Like Eros, perhaps we may say it is self-centered, but like Eros, it rises to the heavens. Prema, on the other hand, has been interpreted as love without desire, without self-interest. Here again, there is no ultimate difference in essence. The distinction is mainly in the form, although I think that the Bhaktas would say that all true advance in love is marked by a triumph of prema over kama. And now let us return for a minute to agape. The use of the word is rare in the synoptic Gospels of the New Testament, and there it is used indiscriminately of love to God and of natural affection. But it became common in the writings of St. Paul, who developed the idea of the love of God possessing man, something outside himself coming in to fill him with this divine love, did it in a beautiful and significant way. And the great hymn to agape in his first letter to the Corinthians indicates its central place in Christian thought. I may speak in tongues of men or of angels. that if I am without love, I am a sounding gong or a clanging cymbal. I may have the gift of prophecy and know every hidden truth. I may have faith strong enough to move mountains, but if I have no love, I am nothing. I may dole out all that I possess, or even give my body to be burnt, but if I have no love, I am none the better. Love is patient, love is kind, and envies no one. Love is never boastful, nor conceited, nor rude, never selfish, not quick to take offense. Love keeps no score of wrongs, does not gloat over other men's sins, but delights in the truth. There is nothing love cannot face. There is no limit to its faith, its hope, and its endurance. Love will never come to an end. There are three things that last forever: faith, hope, and love. But the greatest of them all is love. St. Paul, however, doesn't say that God is agape. This was left for the Johannine writings, which specifically identify God as agape and agape as God. Herein is love, not that we loved God, but that he loved us. God's agape calls forth agape in men. We love because he first loved us. God is love, and he that dwelleth in love dwelleth in God, and God in him. Now, I think that both these things, actually, the Platonic eros, the Christian agape, and as we'll see in a minute, the Gandhian ahimsa, are all necessary for an understanding of love. They are not contrary to each other. Agape, with its strong emphasis on grace coming down to help man on his way, that is one side of it. Eros is very important to the mystics of the earlier days, and even now, who lay greater stress on the need of man to struggle upwards, to ascend by the ladder of love towards the divine love and beauty. They all have to go together. And let us now, finally, in conclusion, turn to the Gandhian ahimsa, where we are brought down almost with a bump to earth, away from abstractions to realities. In his famous letter to Gandhiji, Tolstoy said this: "Love, which is the striving for the union of human souls and the activity derived from it, is the highest and only law of human life." And he went on to point out that the use of force is incompatible with love as the fundamental law of life, that as soon as violence is permitted, the insufficiency of the law of love is acknowledged, and by this the very law of love is denied. The great civilizations of the West have been built up on violence, and therefore love as a guiding principle of the destinies of nations has come to be regarded as sentimental idealism. But Gandhiji's primary aim was to establish love as a normal and practicable relation between human beings. He took love out of its domestic seclusion and introduced it into world politics. Love was the one secret of India's freedom. And long ago he declared that if India adopted the doctrine of love as an active part of her religion and brought it into her politics, Swaraj would descend upon her as from heaven. This meant that we were never to have any hatred of people, but only of principles. The man who is saturated with the spirit of non-violence has never any quarrel with a single individual. His opposition is directed to a system, to the evil that is in man, but not against the man himself. Gandhiji believed that ahimsa was a very practical means of settling disputes. I have been practicing, he says, with scientific precision, non-violence and its possibilities for an unbroken period of over 50 years. I have applied it in every walk of life, domestic, institutional, economic, and political. I know of no single case where it has failed. Where it has seemed sometimes to have failed, I have ascribed it to my imperfections. Passive resistance, he says again, is an all-sided sword. It can be used anyhow. It blesses him who uses it and him against whom it is used. Without drawing a drop of blood, it produces far-reaching results. It never rusts and cannot be stolen. Ahimsa has been criticized as a negative doctrine and contrasted with the positive energy of Christian love. Gandhiji's explained the reason for this. All life, he says, in the flesh exists by some violence. Hence the highest religion has been defined by a negative word, ahimsa. The world is bound in a chain of destruction. In other words, violence is an inherent necessity for life in the body. This is why a votary of ahimsa always prays for ultimate deliverance from the bondage of the flesh. Moreover, to Gandhiji, ahimsa meant a great deal more than non-killing. To me, he says, it has a world of meaning and takes me into realms much higher, infinitely higher. It really means that you may not offend anybody. You may not harbor an uncharitable thought, even in connection with one who may consider himself to be your enemy. To one who follows this doctrine, there is no room for an enemy. Ahimsa is essentially an active force, despite the negative form of the word. If I am a follower of ahimsa, I must love my enemy. I must apply the same rules to the wrongdoer, who is my enemy or a stranger to me, as I would to my wrongdoing father or son. This active ahimsa necessarily includes truth and fearlessness. As man cannot deceive the loved one, he does not fear or frighten him or her. The gift of life is the greatest of all gifts. A man who gives it in reality disarms all hostility. He has paved the way for an honorable understanding, and none who himself is subject to fear can bestow that gift. He must therefore be himself fearless. A man cannot practice ahimsa and be a coward at the same time. And ahimsa must pervade the whole of life. Non-violence is a power which can be wielded equally by all, provided they have a living faith in the God of love and have therefore equal love for all mankind. When non-violence is accepted as the law of life, it must pervade the whole being and not be applied to isolated acts. This spirit of love was the controlling factor of Gandhiji's own life. Non-violence was the first article of his faith and the last article of his creed. He claimed to be incapable of hating any being on earth, for by a long course of discipline he ceased to hate anybody. Like every true lover, he was very humble and very daring. He loved his followers so much that he dared to ask anything of them, and yet he claimed no followers and placed himself last of all. His love was seen in his accessibility. He was open to everyone and interested in everyone. For him, love was a fine art and courtesy the finest part of it. He was so loving that he could concentrate entirely on the immediate problem before him. While he was talking to you, he was yours completely. He was thinking of you and of your problem and of nothing else. That great mind, vexed with the multitudinous questions of a subcontinent, was for the time being focused upon you and your little needs. That was a great achievement in the art of love. Courtesy, concentration, identification are thus aspects of the art of love, but its crown is action. It was love that drove Gandhiji to his stupendous labors. Love made him concentrate on the great human needs: food, cloth, housing. Love without works is dead. It was his frequent prayer that he might never be separated from the poor and that he might lay down his life in their service. I doubt if the distinctions between agape and eros, calm and prema, would have meant very much to Gandhiji. He was a very practical person. The spiritual side of love is nothing unless it's translated into material terms. Love must save mankind from the evils of war, the sorrows of poverty. In a world controlled by love, none will go hungry, and the vast unhappiness caused by hatred and selfishness will disappear. Love is thus the simple secret of existence. It is the certain pathway to truth. To see the all-pervading spirit of truth face to face, one must be able to love the meanest of creation as oneself. Having flung aside the sword, concludes Gandhiji, there is nothing except the cup of love which I can offer to those who oppose me. I cannot think of permanent enmity between man and man, and believing as I do in the theory of rebirth, I live in the hope that if not in this birth, in some other birth, I shall be able to hug all humanity in friendly embrace. Some of you may have been hugged by Gandhiji. I was. And I remember that there was nothing so warm and friendly in the whole world as Gandhiji's hug which he would give to all humanity.